back to the Football Tribe UG channel. Robert Kesakos is your usual suspect. Welcome back to yet another live broadcast on your favorite football updates channel. It's a pleasure to be back on this beautiful Saturday morning, 34 minutes past the hour of 10 a.m. that we do come to you live right from Kampala to once again bring you the latest from the world of football and more. Like I promised you last night in a short-lived live broadcast in which we did speak about Arsenal and previewed that game between the Gunners and Fulham that is upcoming, looked at their injury situation and everything to do with that. Hello, Pedri. How are you? How is your beautiful morning? So I promised you that we would look at some of the comments by Ruben Amorim. We'll get to look elsewhere. I will go to Spain and look at the implications of what are the games that are coming your way this weekend I will have. I do not know why, but I miss the international break a lot. Pedri, I think you're afraid Barcelona may get beat. Following last night's scare between PSG and Strasbourg, that game ending 3-3 at a point, bearing in mind that Strasbourg led the game at some point by 3-1, perhaps is what is giving you the scare of your own when it comes to the Spanish La Liga. Also, the mere fact that Barcelona lost in their last La Liga outing by 4-1 against Sevilla does not give you much confidence. Maybe you a part of you hopes that you could postpone you could postpone perhaps the fixture, but it's going to come. And it's going to come soon rather than later at 5:15 p.m. East African time. That means it's going to be 3:15 p.m. around UK time. So, but it's a home game. You should be really, really confident. Be excited that you're playing Girona. Of course, after which you will have your own engagements in the UEFA Champions League and things like that. So, I do not know. There's never a part of me that misses the international break. The only international break I did ever miss, perhaps, is that of 2022 in December when we had the Qatar World Cup. So I do not think we're going to have any other occasion in that realm in the very, very near future, unless otherwise. So I wouldn't say that I missed the international break. So particularly, maybe there's a part of you that I need to understand. What part of the international break do you miss, particularly? Maybe we can start there and work our way up, because it's a bit odd actually to even hear somebody say it, that they missed the international break. So we will be speaking about all those things in that context, in that realm, and I hope you do stay with us for the length of time. You say, I'm imagining now my life when the World Cup 2026 finishes, then it's until 2030 for the next one. But also there is the Asian Cup in 2027, Euros in 2028, and the Summer Olympics 2028. Also, then 2 years until the next World Cup. When you highlight them in that manner, that's a good chronology of events. That means there's plenty to look forward to, and it simply means that soon rather than later, you will have action return, depending on how you sort of want it to happen or how soon you want it to happen. It should be getting our way really, really soon. For the World Cup, personally, I have no quarrels whatsoever. The mere fact that it comes once every 4 years is what makes it even more interesting, is what makes us look forward to it. We sort of have, towards it, we have that anxiety of, trying to guess who we think will try and win it, because we know how prestigious it is to win it. We know how or what it means for countries that have won it before. We know what it meant in 2010 for Spain to win it. We know what it meant for France to win it for the first time since in ages, when they won it back in 2018. So, or maybe 3 years is better. With the kinds of fixtures that are or with the kinds of international tournaments that there are, it's really, really hard to say that maybe 3 years would be better. Because look at it this way. You see, when it comes very often, sometimes it's not going to come with the same amount of steam that you'd want to have it, that you'd want it to have. Particularly, I've seen these kinds of sentiments around the Africa Cup of Nations that comes every 2 years. And sometimes we feel it's rushed, because what happens essentially is that we get to have an Africa Cup played, and then soon after it, we're into qualifiers for the next edition, because literally it does not rest. The iteration continues in that sort of conveyor belt. So what essentially happens is we have an Africa Cup, say, we're going to have one in 2025 in December. Then soon after, 2026, we get into the qualifiers for AFCON 2027. I don't know if you get that part. So basically, it becomes a little too much. And also look at it in the perspective of what players have to go through, in the sense of the amount of games that they have to play, because if we put it every 3 years, that means it will be played immediately after the Euros. Again, you've seen what happens with the Copa America. It comes very often and very quick. And to say that sometimes it feels rushed is an understatement, So I think sometimes it is the wait that makes it worth it, the wait that we have to wait 4 years to have it played. Now you also have the UEFA Nations League. I understand people have not grown to love it that much, but it is also a competition that gets played, So I understand that bit. You say, I just want the World Cup to never end, but also, what do you think of the World Cup being cut to every 2 years? I think it will be too much football. Maybe not too much football to the fans, but too much football for the players. But also, even on the side of the fans, there's such a thing as too much football. Why? Because there is a financial element to it. Whether you go to the stadium to watch the game, whether you have to pay TV to watch it, yeah, there's something like that. There's a financial implication to it. So, and then the financial implication is not just about to the fan, it is also to the potential host nations and everything that comes with football, really, when it comes to that big stage. So I feel that 2 years is a short time. You say, oh, maybe 3 years is better. Again, maybe I'm too accustomed to the 4-year gap that my mind is not accommodating the sort of changes that you're suggesting. But I want to look at it, not just the isolation of the World Cup itself, but also while being cognizant of the fact that there's other tournaments that get played. So, for example, we just came out of the Euros 2024. That was last summer. This very summer, we had the UEFA Nations finals that were played, and Portugal winning that. Then quickly, next summer, we have the World Cup. After the World Cup, which is, and by the way, before the World Cup, in December, we have the AFCON 2025. After that, in the summer, we have the World Cup. After the World Cup, then we go into 2026. Sorry, we will be already in 2026. Then in Africa, we'll be looking forward or towards the AFCON 2027, which has 3 host nations in Uganda, Kenya, and Tanzania. So that's very crucial for us here. Then immediately after that AFCON, or during that AFCON, or the same year, we have the Nations League again. And then after that, we have the Euros. So if you look at the World Cup in isolation, you will see that it takes long to come around. And the mere fact that it only comes around every 4 years feels like it's too long a way to go about. But if you look at it in the context of other tournaments that get to be played during that span of time, then you'll know like particularly the way you've summarized it, because when it comes to international tournaments, every continent has their own tournament, the Euros, the AFCON, CONCACAF, Asian Cup, and things like that, or Copa America, every continent has their own thing. So you say, you imagine, you say you do not want the World Cup to end. Now, here's how I put it. No matter how good it is, no matter how entertaining it is, it has to come to an end. Reason being, even you yourself would get tired of it. Let me give the example of this cup. If we have, let's say, this mug full of, let's say, juice, pineapple juice, we'll use the example of what you like the most. If this cup is full, and let's say you've gone the last 24 hours without taking pineapple juice, you may sip off that juice in this mug for within under 5 minutes, and it's empty. If you've gone a day without it, or 2 days. However, after 5 minutes of you consuming this cup, if we add you another cup full, it may take you 10 minutes to consume. After those 10 minutes, if we will refill the same cup, it may take you 20 to 30 minutes to empty the same cup. And after those 20-30 minutes, if we refill the cup, it may take you possibly an hour to finish the same cup. So it means your consumption period of the same cup, of the same juice, grows bigger. Why? Because the more you take, the more satisfaction you derive. And then until you reach at that point of satiety, or the bliss point, and then you will begin to experiencing what we call diminishing marginal utility, from the juice. But it does not mean that you do not love the juice. So basically, if the World Cup were to go on and on, at some point we would get tired of it, because it's that climax of it that we particularly love the most. Of course, it comes with its anxiety. Sometimes we enjoy a tournament so much that we feel it's rushed. But also, bear this in mind, that for the first time, we're not going to have 64 games. We're going to have about 103 games, because the World Cup in itself has been expanded to 48 teams. So that means you have another possibly 40 or 39 something games, or 40 games that are being added to the roster. So that's more football for you to watch. Unfortunately, the first edition of that kind of expanded World Cup is going to be in the United States, Mexico, and Canada. Now, I use the word unfortunate, not because they are a bad host community, but because of the time zones within which games will be played and how it impacts on football fans across the world. We know that for the rest of the world, of course, it's similar to what Americans have to go through watching the Premier League that they get to enjoy, for those that enjoy it. I used to chat with a friend, a former colleague, with whom we went to the same school with, and he would tell me that sometimes he had to wake up at 1 a.m. or so to watch a Premier League game, or very early in the morning, depending on the time zones. So we got to experience something similar. I think it would have favored us. When I say us, I mean majority of the footballing community, of spectators community, of football fans community, to the rest of the world, if the kickoff time for those games was more friendlier to most of the time zones, as opposed to, because imagine, I do not know what I constantly forget what the time zones or the timelines are for you. But imagine you have to wake up at 4 a.m. in the morning or 3 a.m. to watch, let's say, Argentina versus Portugal, and then after that, you have to go to work or you have to go to school. But then when you return from school, again, you have to do it over again, because then suddenly Brazil are up against England, Spain are up against Netherlands. One game kicking off at 11 p.m. The next game kicking off at 1 a.m. And then you have, another game. Let's say France up against Germany. At 4 a.m. So all those are big games that you'd ideally love to watch. So if you want to watch all of them, you can see how the timeline may not favor you. As opposed if one of the games kicked off, let's say, at 5 p.m. in the evening, and then the other came at 7:30 or 8, and then the other came at 10. That's more favorable, a timeline. So whereas I understand your school of thought and arguments, I look at it in that sense. So, but nonetheless, we're going to have more games, so you will get to watch more games if the time zones or the timelines eventually favor you in that regard. Then you also went on to say, you just want the World Cup never to end. I think I've tackled that comment. You say, but also, if it's less years, we get to enjoy older players more. Yes. Now I understand that players have to wait a period of 4 years to sort of watch, so to have to wait for 4 years to sort of play again in the same competition. That if, for example, you feature in the World Cup 2030 and you're 30 years old, you have to wait until 2034 when you turn 34 or possibly even 35 to play at the next World Cup, during which your career may be on the downward trajectory and maybe you do not get someone to your national team. Now, again, it's a bit of a catch-22. Why? Because we cannot just readjust the World Cup to suit players that are aging. The only way you get to play more World Cups, one, is if you start very young, but also finish very old. Particularly, look at Cristiano Ronaldo. I'll take you back in 2006. Theo Walcott made it to the England national team squad for the 2006 World Cup that was hosted by Germany. And he was only, 16 years of age at the time. But present day, as we speak, he's already retired from football. And so after 2006, you had 2010, 14, 18, 22. But that's 5 World Cups that he would have played if he had been summoned to all editions. Of course, he was never good enough to get summoned to all editions. But that's 5. That's good enough. 5 World Cup tournaments would be good enough for a player, So look at it in that sense. Then you also submit that Nations League is a waste of time. In my opinion, it's basically a mini Euros that no one cares about. I understand your sentiments around that. When you say about the Euros, that you say nobody cares. I think some people care for it. However, they do not care for it as much as they would care for the Euros. It's similar. Again, it's similar to what we have in Africa. People love the Africa Cup of Nations more than they do love the African Nations Championships. Now, the difference between the two tournaments is, one, for the African Nations Championships, teams get summoned, whichever teams qualify, and then the competition is played over a period of a month, and it's done. Whereas for the UEFA Nations League, feels like a series of major tournament qualification games. And then suddenly we go into a period of 2 weeks when we play the semifinals and eventually the finals. But also, the other catch is, here in Africa, in comparison, the African Nations Championships is played by players that play within their domestic leagues. So, for example, Uganda Cranes cannot summon a player that plays in Kenya a Ugandan player that plays in Tanzania, a Ugandan player that plays in South Africa, a Ugandan player that plays in Egypt, a Ugandan player that plays in France or Cyprus or India or Malaysia or Kuala Lumpur. Sorry, not Kuala Lumpur, or Singapore, wherever it is. So that player must be playing within the Uganda Premier League. And that applies to all countries, that players must be playing within their domestic leagues. And the reason as to why it was invented or the tournament came about was to help further showcase the African talent at a bigger scene for players that are playing within the domestic leagues. Because then when you get to Africa Cup of Nations, you will see that most of the countries that qualify, some of the biggest talents that are playing overseas, you know. So you'll find that in a squad of 23 players or 25, you'll find that only 2 or 3 players play from the domestic leagues. And majority of the other players are being summoned from abroad, you know. So in that sense. Now, because European football in general is far advanced, even if we are to summon domestic players, it will still more or less feel the same kind of thing because of the quality that there is within. If you are to apply the same principle for the UEFA Nations League, nonetheless, I still think it would help. So, for example, just imagine, let's say, Spain had to summon their team for the UEFA Nations League, and then they can't summon Mikel Merino, they can't summon Martin Zubimendi, they can't summon David Raya, Kepa Arrizabalaga, because all those are players playing overseas. But they can only summon players playing from within the Spanish La Liga. Now, of course, it would be a stronger team because you still have Lamine Yamal, Johan Garcia, Unai Simon, Mikel Oyarzabal, all playing at home. Pedri, Gavi, you see? However, maybe for them the principle would be that you summon players from teams, let's say outside maybe the top 5 in the league, so that you get eventually to summon players that are playing for Real Sociedad, players that are playing for Rio Oviedo, players that are playing for Sevilla, players that are playing for Valencia. And I'm talking about present-day Valencia, Sevilla, because they're not the teams of yesterday, you know, if you get what I mean. So maybe that would help if that were to be the principle. But I do understand what you mean when you say that the Nations League is a waste of time. Although we are at a difference of opinion on that one. You say, but the good thing is that the new format is 11 days extra than the 2022 World Cup. Okay, yeah, that's the video bit. You're having 48 teams as compared to having 32 teams, as traditionally had been the case. Excuse me. So you see that an extra 16 teams have joined. So that will give us more games afterwards. You also add on that I've seen that the matches for the UK for the World Cup will be at 17:00 hours, at 20:00 hours, and 23:00 hours, and then 02:00 hours. I can watch probably 3 of them. I don't like the timings of Europe next year. Now, again, for example, if you say 17:00 hours, that would be 5 p.m. European time. Particularly here, it would mean 7 p.m. Ugandan time or East African time. Then at 10 p.m., sorry, at 8 p.m. European time, it would mean it's 10 p.m. Ugandan time or East African time. Now, those 2 games, that's okay here. Now, when you get to the 23:00 hours time, that's 11 p.m. European time. Here, it's 1 a.m. East African time. So now you can see that then somebody will sit and think, can I stay awake until 3 a.m. to watch a particular game? For selected games that are literally a must or a do or die, or depending on which team somebody pays allegiance to, they may choose to watch that game and then have to sleep for fewer hours. But for the game that kicks off at 02:00 hours and I'm assuming that's 2 a.m. European time, that means it's 4 a.m. Ugandan time or East African time. Nobody's going to stay up to watch that. When I say nobody, I mean that as literally. It doesn't mean that no one will ever watch games at that time. There are people that will watch, but it depends. Are you going to watch a game at 4 a.m. when that ends at 6 a.m. and you have to be at work by 7 a.m. or 7:30 or 8? So you can see the conundrum. I'd stay awake because this is every 4 years, unless it's like Paraguay versus Cape Verde, then I do not care. I will go to sleep for the fourth game. Again, let me speak about the difference in context or the difference in nature of lifestyle. So, for example, we know that many Europeans, and I do not mean majority, but a good number of Europeans take work breaks. I don't know if it's leave or work breaks during the summer. Schools break off during the summer, unless somebody has a summer program to attend. So for such people, or for people in those categories, it's okay for them to stay awake and watch those games because they know they will have the rest of time in terms of during day to catch a nap or to sleep. That's all okay. But imagine, I'll get the example these days, what we've had to go through on this channel specifically. Between you and I, Pedri, you remember during the course of the summer, you remember the kinds of numbers we were attracting here on the channel. We could have 10, 16, 20, sometimes 40, 50 people on our live, watching with us, engaging, because it was during summer. People, or most people that are school-going students, had the time. But now, because it's school time, it's only a handful, a few people. You, LFC, the Yellow Diet, and a couple of others here and there, So why? Because the timelines within which I do these live broadcasts, particularly in the morning, people are preparing to go to school or to go to work. Whereas during the summer, they're not in that sort of rush. Yes, they had things to do or to run to, but they were not in that sort of rush. Then when it comes to our night broadcasts, which start at 11 p.m., for most of you, it's 9 p.m. People are done with dinner, they're catching a movie, it's family time, or it's time to do homework, research, whatever it is they have to do, or to do some bit of extra reading, and then prepare to go to bed by 10 p.m. And then by 10 p.m. or 11 p.m., so that then they can be ready or wake up early for the next day, and the routine continues. So you see that difference in the things that you need to tend to or to be ready for is what then impacts on your availability. So if it's going to come during the course of the summer when maybe you're broken off from school, I understand. But imagine, let's say your bigger brother, your sister, or your dad, or your mom, or guardian, whichever the case is, who enjoys football as well, but they have to wake up and go to work very early in the morning. That maybe they have to be up by 6 a.m., get ready, and maybe by 6:45 they're driving out, so that they beat the traffic or whatever the case is. Just imagine it for them. Would they watch that last game in the night? Obviously not. But I do understand when you say that for lesser games. I think if people want the lesser games to be watched, then the lesser games should be kicking off early, and the bigger games should be kicking off late, because once they are the ones kicking off late, literally everybody will have gone to sleep. Again, the other example we can draw to, you remember during the recently concluded FIFA Club World Cup that Chelsea went on to win. You remember that when some smaller teams were playing, or let's say, for lack of a better word, less known teams, like Mamelodi Sundowns, if they were playing against a small team from South America that nobody knows much about, you could see that the stadiums were empty. Why? Because they're the local fans too, who love football but are not fans of those respective clubs, did not see why they should be sacrificing dead hours of time to go and watch that kind of game. Whereas it did not matter who Real Madrid were playing against, fans still showed up because they are Real Madrid. And at what time they were playing. So they still attracted the big numbers. So look at it in that sense. Anyways, I think we've digested the World Cup and what's to come, or the timelines and everything to the fullest. So thank you so much, Pedri, for taking us down that rabbit hole to discuss, this thing. Because earlier also you mentioned about the Summer Olympics 2028, Asian Cup, AFCON, you missed AFCON 2027, AFCON 2025, but yeah, I understand, but that's the nature of sports, Anyways, let's move on. Let's move away from the World Cup discussion and go to the discussion of Ruben Amorim, because remember a couple of weeks or just over a week ago when Sir Jim Ratcliffe did that interview with the Times, the Times business podcast, and he talked about Ruben Amorim and how much time he needs, to sort of prove himself. He talked about him needing 3 years to prove himself. However, Ruben Amorim begs to differ on that opinion, speaking ahead of their 100th game against Liverpool, the biggest rivalry in English football as far as history serves us, because their rivalry dates far back to the Industrial Revolution, each wanting to be the biggest city with the biggest factories and things like that, financially and everything that came with it. He says, I can't bank on 3 years at Manchester United. I think while Sir Jim Ratcliffe makes that sort of promise that it is a long-term project for which they cannot just change managers at the whims of journalists that may be criticizing the team or showing a certain level of discontentedness with how affairs are going at Manchester United. Ruben Amorim, he himself is alive to the fact that time is never on your side in modern day football. He knows that people say one thing in the media and do something totally different when nobody is watching. So, and I remember mentioning this, that take those comments from Sir Jim Ratcliffe with a pinch of salt. Why? Because he could have said that for PR reasons, for public relations reasons. And in itself, it meant that, of course, he couldn't just sit there and say, yeah, if he doesn't do well in the next couple of games, we're going to fire him, or things are not so good, so his job is at risk, or soon rather than later, we're going to show him the exit. He couldn't have said that. He had to protect his name. He had to protect the brand of Manchester United. He had to say the right things, and saying the right things, including sort of guaranteeing a future for Ruben Amorim. Now, it could be true that he can guarantee for the next 3 years. But like I say, if these results do not change in the coming games or in the next couple of months, then he may be out of a job by Christmas or immediately after Christmas or way prior to Christmas. They have failed to string a couple of victories. They have failed to register 2 consecutive victories in the Premier League. Yes, they have 3 consecutive victories in the Premier League at Old Trafford, but they've not been consecutive. That's the one game in, game out. They played at Old Trafford, won, went away from Old Trafford, lost, came back to Old Trafford, won, went away from home, lost. Something like that. So Ruben Amorim is aware that in modern day football, time is not something that you get accorded or afforded. just simply that way. It's the results that back you up, you know. So as they go to Anfield for their 100, excuse me, as they go to Anfield for their 100th encounter, the cameras are going to be on him as much as they will be on Liverpool, because lose, and there's going to be a lot of speculation about his future. The Daily Mail recently were reporting that apparently former Manchester City manager and ex-Italian national team manager and Inter Milan, Roberto Mancini wants the Man United job. Whether he would get it or not, that remains to be seen. Whether it's just rumor mongering by the Daily Mail, again, that we do not know with absolute certainty. But that means the center is not holding for Ruben Amorim. Omar Barada, he himself did acknowledge that he did admit that it has taken longer for Ruben Amorim to adapt to the Premier League following his move from Sporting Lisbon nearly a year ago, you know, than they had anticipated. Because in 34 Premier League games that he's managed them through, they've only won 10 with the 40-year-old. So if you've only won 10, that means you have dropped points in the other 24. How many of those have been losses? How many of those have been draws? So when you think about it that way, one, you understand where Ruben Amorim is coming from to have his fears. But also, when you dissect Sir Jim Ratcliffe's speech or interview, you will understand that he could not just toss Ruben Amorim under the bus, that he was just not going to sit there and say, yeah, if he doesn't win the game against Liverpool, then he's as good as gone, and things like that. So here's what Ruben Amorim had to say. He said, while speaking about the comments from from Sir Jim Ratcliffe, he said, it's really good to hear it, but he tells me all the time, sometimes with a message after games. But you know, I know, and Jim knows that football is not like that. The most important thing is the next game. Even with owners, you cannot control the next day in football. I mean, you couldn't have put it any better. That even with owners, you cannot control what happens in football. Today they may be willing to be patient with you, and then tomorrow they wake up and they are suddenly no longer willing to be patient with you. Today they may be singing praises of you, and then tomorrow they may be tossing you under the bus. But also, as investors, they are about results, and it's results that translate into economic progress or success in a way. Then also, there comes pressure from the fans. Now, it doesn't matter how much influence Sir Jim Ratcliffe has. It wouldn't matter how much. Hi, LFC, good to have you. Sorry, Robert, I can't stay. I'm about to get on a bus for 2 hours for my rugby match. I will be there. I'll be there. I wish you could follow the conversation while on the bus, but I do understand. Thank you so much for chipping in, LFC. I hope you're doing well. I hope you're having a good weekend. But thank you always for sparing the moment to let us know that you are in our support, that you got our back, that you're often always here with us, almost always, you know. Anyways, back to the gist of it. So he says that I know, and Jim knows, that football is not like that. Football is about results, and results that are winning, results that show progress, results that are promising. Once you do not have that, then no matter how good you are with the media, no matter how much the fans love you, your bosses can decide to part ways with you. No matter how much your bosses love you, the fans could cause an uprising, not in the sense of overthrowing you, but to show their dissatisfaction with your services. And that sort of pressure coming from the fans could force the club's hand to show you an exit, you know? So yeah, he did say that the most important thing is the next game. Even with owners, you cannot control the next day. So he knows that the next game is what is important, is what it counts. Because once you get 3 points on board, regardless of who you get them against and how you get them against them, then the conversation will always be, yeah, they got the victory. So I think that's something to think about in that deeper sense. We know that there's been lots of speculation around his future, mentioning names like Oliver Glasner, who we discussed on the channel recently. For those of you that want to share our thoughts or to understand what our thoughts are, go to the channel under the video section. You will find that video regarding Oliver Glasner wanting the Manchester United job. There have been mentions of Zinedine Zidane. There have been mentions of Andon Iraola from AFC Bournemouth and things like that. Why? Because the results have not been going Ruben Amorim's way, then causing speculation over his future. So, however, Ruben Amorim also said he does not feel the uncertainty internally at the club's Carrington training ground, and is adamant nothing can match the pressure he puts on his players. This is according to the BBC Sport. He says, it's not just a thing that people talk about. I feel it every day. It's really good to hear it because it helps our fans to understand the leadership, know it is going to take a while. But at the same moment, I don't like it because it gives a feeling that we have time to work things out. I do not want that feeling in our club. The pressure I put on the team or on myself is so much bigger than that from outside. Football, especially in big clubs, you need to prove yourself every weekend. He couldn't have said it any better. In football, especially in big clubs, you need to prove yourself every weekend. That's why, for all the good that Mikel Arteta has done, particularly at Arsenal, finishing second 3 consecutive times, and all the other things he has done, taking them back to the UEFA Champions League, seeing them to the semi-finals, and things in that regard. If they lose the next game or the next set of 2 games, then questions are going to be raised on his future, they're going to be raised upon his abilities and everything to do with that. So he does expect this kind of criticism. He does expect this sort of backlash from fans. However, like he acknowledges, he does not want the promise of a guaranteed future at Manchester United to hamper their progress, to make players or his team think that time is on their side. You see, I'll give you an example again. And for those of you that have been to school or those that are still school going, look at it this way. You get into, let's say, a semester that is 4 months. And in the first month, or towards the tail end of the first month, they give you an assignment, either an individual assignment, a group assignment, or anything in that regard, but an assignment. And they tell you that assignment will be due in the final week of the 3rd month of the semester. So that means practically you have about 2 months to get that research done, to get that coursework done or assignment done. Do you know what will happen? You'll develop a bit of complacency. You will procrastinate. Every day you wake up, you'll say, I'll do it tomorrow, I'll do it the other day. And before you know it, you're left with 2 weeks to submit. Before you know it, it will be 1 week left for you to submit, and eventually it will be time to submit. Now, you'll see people do all sorts of things in a panic manner. And yet, somehow, they knew for the previous 2 months that that is what they wanted to do. So yeah, you say, if you want to predict a World Cup group, what would it be? If I had to predict a World Cup group, Mine would be Brazil, Switzerland, Costa Rica, Japan. The question is, there are going to be 12 groups. How about you throw in an African team there? I see you have South America, you have Europe, you have Costa Rica is South America still, that's next to Japan. Maybe add Senegal in that mix, or Egypt. That would be interesting. But I mean, predicting a group stage would be very, very difficult before even clubs are sort of put in the respective pots from which they have to be handpicked before going into the actual group stage. But I'd say England, I'd say Senegal, I'd say Argentina, I'd say Saudi Arabia. So, anyways, apologies on that glitch. So, mine, okay, you say Senegal, Netherlands, Colombia, Poland. Again, that would be interesting. That would be interesting. So, how many teams will be in each of the 12 groups for the World Cup at 2026? I think for me that will be part of the question. Are they going to be 4? 4 times 12 is what? Is 48. So each group is going to have 4 teams. I suspect you'll have a team from, let's say, South America, a team from Europe, a team from Africa, a team from Asia. 4. Then you say Spain, Iran, Morocco, Ecuador. Wow, interesting. But that would be an easy group for Spain. I understand your wishfulness on that one. Why not Spain, Portugal, Morocco, Ecuador? Argentina, Qatar, Cape Verde, Australia. Argentina, Germany, Cape Verde, Australia. You know? So, anyways, anything can happen. Anything can happen. Anything can happen. But the draw for the 2026 FIFA World Cup tournament will take place on Friday, 5th December. So we have approximately about a month and a half for us to get to that date to find out what teams will be in what group. But expect this. Expect at least 2 gargantuan European teams to be in the same group. Expect those kinds of things. Expect those kinds of things. So in other words, okay. You say we have seen a group of Brazil, Switzerland, Serbia under 4th team for 2 years in a row. Costa Rica 2018, Cameroon 2022. I mean, coincidences do happen in football. The same way we saw Arsenal face off with Bayern Munich, I think for 3 consecutive years, or for 3 out of 4 years. We saw it with Barcelona, because in those years, I remember particularly for about 7 years, no, about 7, 8 years, when they were being knocked out of the UEFA Champions League, particularly the round of 16. They would meet Bayern Munich or Barcelona. The only two occasions in which they did not meet either of those two was when they faced off with AC Milan and when they faced off with Monaco. Now, and on one of those two occasions, if not both, they had met Bayern Munich in the group stages. So you can see coincidences happen. Although, like we like to say, that the first time is okay, second time is a coincidence, third time, that's a pattern. That's a pattern. So it ceases to be coincidence. You say when we get all the qualified teams, you should do a group prediction video and maybe using a wheel or draw as well. I will predict the World Cup winner using my PlayStation and I will put all the groups. Okay. Kindly remind me on that. Once we have all the teams that have qualified, let's do the predictions. Remind me to do that, a video when the time comes. As soon as we confirm all teams that will have qualified for the edition, we can always get to do that. We can always get to do that. Yes, I'll remind you. Thank you so much, Pedro. So, anyways, let's conclude on Man United yes, Ruben Amorim was speaking about the uncertainty. And just to reiterate his words, he did say it's not just a thing. Hi, Shumail, how are you doing, my brother? How are you doing? I hope you're okay. It's not just a thing that people talk about. I feel it every day. It's really good to hear it because it helps our fans to understand the leadership. No, it is going to take time. He's trying to get the fans to his side to say that the leadership knows it's going to get time for us to get things right. For Ruben Amorim, unfortunately, it's almost coming to a year. So, how much time does it take in the eyes of the fans? If his bosses think it's going to take 3 years, for how long are fans going to be patient for? Long time indeed, Shumail. I hope you're doing good. You say Arsenal versus Fulham today. Pedro, I'm going to respond to your comment. Baleba Grazer is back. The GOAT will speak about Carlos Baleba at Brighton. I think Brighton have a date with what? With Tottenham? Is it? No, with Newcastle. Brighton have a date with Newcastle. So yeah. He went on to say that, but at the same moment, I do not like it because it gives a feeling that we have time to work on things. I do not want that feeling in the club. The pressure I put on the team or myself is so much bigger. In other words, okay, big clubs come with these kinds of pressure. You know, it's about the results. Every weekend is a test for you. You must win. You must pick a point and perform well. If you do not, fans are going to come at you really, really fast. The media will do so. Before you know it, your bosses will be turning against you. But yeah, that's what Ruben Amorim had to say in response to the comments made earlier on by Sir Jim Ratcliffe that he needs at least 3 years to prove himself. This weekend, Man United are up against Liverpool on Super Sunday in the late kickoff. Be sure not to miss out on that game. That will kick off at 6:30 p.m. at Anfield, a place where they are not won in many games, while their last stamping was 7-0. But after that, they've had a 2-2 draw and a goalless draw at the same time. So my prediction, I did not give my prediction for this game, did I? Or maybe I did. But possibly, I might have gone for a 2-1 victory for Liverpool. Although I wouldn't be surprised if Man United would pick up a draw, you know. Okay, let me first read your comments. Earlier on, Pedro said, I think we have 28 out of 48 teams right now. European teams are pretty clear who is qualifying. Same applies for Africa. those games were done. We know who the 9 teams are. We are waiting to confirm one team that has to go through the playoff, or that playoff. After that, they will meet other teams from other continents, and if they can make it through, then Africa will have the 10th team, or any other continent will take that slot. So yeah. You say, Mr. Tribe, can you explain the World Cup? Mr. Tribe, can you explain the World Cup European qualifiers pathways to be played in March? It is like 3 teams will qualify, a path which has 2 semi-finals, and then finals times 3. Can you explain the World European qualifiers pathways? The World Cup European now, let me explain it in this way. Ordinarily, you remember when Italy failed to make it to the last edition of the World Cup, they had been knocked out in the playoff. I do not remember who knocked them out particularly. But, Mr. Tribe, who do you want to qualify from Africa, Nigeria, or Cameroon? I want both to qualify, but it has to be one. I do not want Gabon or DR Congo to qualify. I mean, it's a tough one because all those countries that you mentioned there are likable. But briefly, let me first conclude with the first question. Now, in the way when teams are grouped, so particularly, if let's say you're on a continent and that continent, let's say, is given 7 slots to qualify for the World Cup, and teams were grouped in 6 groups, what happens is that every top team from the 6 groups will qualify directly to the World Cup. Now, to determine the 7th team that qualifies is when we go and look at the teams, maybe 4 teams that finished second best out of all the groups, particularly what we're talking about Africa just recently, where you highlight those 4 countries in Nigeria, Gabon, Cameroon, and DRC. So then those teams go into a playoff of some sort, which is more like a semi-final, and then whoever wins out of those 4 is then the one that achieves the seventh slot. So basically, that's how it's done. You know, it's not a new concept. That's just how it's done. However, on the side of Africa, people felt aggrieved by by the permutations that were set by CAF in consultation with FIFA or in line with FIFA laws to get that team, because Burkina Faso got dumped out, using that very model, which did not leave them so happy. We explained that the other day. And then you ask about who do I want? I mean, frankly speaking, I do not have any particular soft spot for any of the countries that have been aforementioned. But I'll tell you the things that I like at least about each team and what it would mean for them to qualify. I'll start with Gabon. If Gabon qualify, Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang, I mean, I would be rooting for him. They played some nice football during the qualifiers. When you look at DRC is under the charges of a former Uganda Cranes manager in Sebastian Desabre. So I would have a soft spot for him as an individual because I really liked him. He guided Uganda to AFCON. He guided them through the Africa Cup of Nations of 2019, the 2019 edition that was played in Egypt. And for the first time since 1978, Uganda qualified out of the group stages, were knocked out at the round of 16 by Senegal, losing by 0-0, I think. So I have that soft spot for him. After the tournament, he left and joined Pyramids, where he took a Ugandan star in Abdul Rumara. Eventually, it did not work out, bounced around, and he ended up back at DRC Congo. But anyways, that notwithstanding, so they are also one of our immediate neighbors. We have a large community of Congolese nationals in Uganda, with all the problems that they go through with wars in Eastern DRC Congo. Being neighbors, I have a soft spot for them in that sense. When it comes to Nigeria, Nigeria has always been one of the countries that promises to deliver very, very entertaining and good football, and not just on, particularly on the continent, but not just on the continent, but even at the global scene, because of the so many stars they have playing across the world or the globe. You look at their striking line: Victor Boniface, Victor Osimhen. I think he was really, really pivotal in their win against Benin. There are so many good players. Over the years, they've had the Yakubu Ayagbeni, the Obafemi Martins, the JJ Okochas, Yunus Kameni, Vincent Enyama, the goalkeeper. So Ligobert Song. Oh, not Ligobert Song. Ligobert Song was Cameroonian, or was Cameroon. Sorry. So, but Wilfred Ndidi, present day, in that midfield. So Alex Iwobi, Trust Ekong, and that kind of thing. So I have a sort of a soft spot for them in that sense, that they've always delivered good football. Then when it comes to Cameroon, Cameroon has always been known to be the combative team of Africa, to be the team that comes with the physicality into the game, the team that brings that grind into the game, the team that you're not going to score so many goals against, that if you're to beat them, it's going to be with a bit of a narrow margin. They were always told sort of mugged or beefcakes, whichever way you want to call them, and things like that. So particularly, we've had a liking to them. You remember that goal scored by who? I'm forgetting. Almost made it for the goal of the tournament at the 2022 World Cup by a Cameroonian star who was playing in the Saudi Pro League, whose shirt 7 had to be withdrawn to be handed to Cristiano Ronaldo. His name eludes me, but if you can remember it, help me type it in the comment section. So in that sort of sense, so I do have a soft spot for all those teams with their respective circumstances. I would say whoever qualifies should qualify, but if you boil down to pedigree, I'll go with either Nigeria and Cameroon. But I say if they've not been able to qualify directly, then why not give a chance to a team like Gabon to get there, maybe DRC to get there as well. So in that sort of sense. So yeah, I hope I've answered your questions, Pedri. But that's how I want to think of it. To go back to Shmail said Arsenal versus Fulham today. I wanted to go back to that comment in just a bit. Yes, this is a game we did discuss last night. Where the strengths are, the weaknesses, and we know for a fact that Fulham is a team laden with so many injuries as Arsenal. They have their injury concerns to deal with. We did mention them again. Mikel Arteta provided a chunk of updates regarding some of the injured players: Martin Odegaard, Noni Madueke, Pierre Hincap, who has been out with a groin injury. This one has returned back to training. Ben White had missed training. Noni Madueke is out injured. Gabriel Jesus and Kai Havertz. On the side of Fulham, you have Sasa Lukic, Samuel Chukwueze, Ante Robinson, Rodrigo Muniz, Raul Jimenez, Kenny Tete, all sidelined with injury. However, given Arsenal's broad squad with the kind of squad depth they have, the absence of all those key players should not hold them back from trying to win that game, or should not be an excuse as to why they failed to win the game away to Fulham, where they've not won since around March 2023 when they beat up against Fulham by 3-0. Gabriel Magalhaes and I think Gabriel Martinelli among the goal scorers when Leandro Trossard was providing the hat-trick of assists on the day in that 2022-2023 campaign. Then the last other two meetings have been, one has been a 2-1 loss and the other was a 1-1 draw. So Fulham is a bit of a stubborn side for Arsenal to face. It's a London derby. It comes with that sort of feistiness. Then also you have players that have just returned from the international break. On Thursday, Martin Zubimendi did not train because Mikel Arteta thought he should give them, he should give him an extra day of rest because he's played so many minutes of football, both for club and country, in the last couple of weeks. He did represent Spain really, really well. So yeah, there's that to think about. Pedri says, do you think Barcelona will win today? I just do not think. I expect Barcelona to win today against Girona. I mean, I expect them to win. I mean, you're the reigning champions. You want to defend the accolade. Girona is one of those teams that you should be beating up against. Last I checked, Girona, I think, are third from bottom. Behind them is Real Sociedad and Rayo Mallorca on the Spanish La Liga standings. So I expect them to win. You say I believe it will be Fulham 0, Arsenal 6. I went for a 3-0 victory for Arsenal, but let's just wait and see again. But when you look at, I'm joking. I think it will be Fulham 0, Arsenal 3. Looks like we do share the same mind when it comes to our prediction. But yeah, I expect Schmeichel, expect David Raya in goal, Ricardo Carafiori, Gabriel Magalhaes, William Saliba, Jurgen Timber, Martin Zubimendi, Declan Rice, Leandro Trossard, Ebeleche, Eze, Bukayo Saka, and Victor Gyökeres as the starters. However, should changes be made, obviously, it's one that you would not say expect, but one you would welcome, given that also Arsenal have an engagement in the midweek in the UEFA Champions League, as many other teams. For Arsenal, their date is going to be against Atletico Madrid, very, very stubborn side who have recently beaten up against big teams. Excuse me. I remember the trouble they caused Liverpool before they lost 3-2 at Anfield. When it comes to that, to the UEFA Champions League, you remember the trouble they caused Real Madrid when they put 5 past them. So Arsenal will be concerned of the fact that while they've not had the most decent of starts to their La Liga campaign, where they have, I think, 3 wins, 4 draws, and 1 loss so far in 8 La Liga games, leaving them at about what, 13 points? No. Oh, I need to confirm. But essentially, what it means, let's look at the standings just briefly. Yes, they have 13 points, 3 wins, 4 draws. Yes, in that sort of sense. So you would want to think that Arsenal will be alive to that threat. So if some players are to be rested or to given lesser minutes, please bear in mind that there is a very, very crucial game coming midway in the week in the UEFA Champions League. Pedri says, Pedri says, I agree with you. I think Gabriel Magalhaes will score 2 goals today. He told me yesterday. I didn't know you had Gabriel Magalhaes' number and that you are chat buddies. Anyway, can I say something, because I am focused on the World Cup now. I do not care as much now about club football, but maybe after this weekend, I will get excited over it. Please go ahead and say whatever it is you want to say. We will digest it. But to conclude on Fulham versus Arsenal for Schmeichel, who brought that to the comment section, I'd say that when Fulham have a couple of former Arsenal players in Bernard Leno, Alex Iwobi, and Emil Smith-Rowe, so they're always a tricky opponent. It's a game that Arsenal have struggled to win in the last couple of encounters. In fact, when you look at the statistics in the last 5 games, you'll find that Arsenal beat up against Fulham by 2-1 last season, while the reverse fixture had been a 1-1 draw. Then when you go back to last season but 1, Fulham beat up against Arsenal by 2-1, while the reverse fixture had been a 2-2 draw against the Gunners. So you can see that while Arsenal have only managed to win 2 games in the last 3, out of the have only managed to win 2 games out of the last 5. The other 2 have been draws, and Fulham have won the other. So it's not a very a full-blown conclusion that Arsenal will just beat up against Fulham. But yeah, we do expect them to win today. Also, in terms of given Fulham's injuries, expect Bernard Leno in goal, Issa Diop, Joachim Anderson, formerly at Crystal Palace, Calvin Bassey in that back 3, then Timothy Castagna, Tom Kiani, Sander Badge, Ryan Sessegnon, Joshua King, Alex Iwobi, and Harry Wilson, because they are without Raul Jimenez and Rodrigo Moniz, who are their target men up front. So they are struggling with those injuries. So that means you could see a false 9 playing for them. I think it was Marco Silva who was speaking at his press conference or in the build-up to this particular game, saying that yes, they miss Kai Havertz, but they have a 75 million player in Victor Gyökeres. Yes, they do not have their captain in Martin Odegaard, but they have Eberechi Eze. In other words, trying to allude to how good their squad depth is, pound for pound, in all the respective positions. Then quickly, away from the Arsenal game, let's run to the Spanish La Liga briefly, but just maybe to remind you what fixtures are coming your way in as far as the Premier League is concerned today. At 2:30 p.m., Chelsea are away to Nottingham Forest, and then at 5 p.m. you have about 5 games, including Brighton at home against Newcastle, Burnley at home against Leeds, while FC Bournemouth will be away to Selhurst Park against Crystal Palace. Everton will play away to the Etihad Stadium against Manchester City, while Sunderland will be at home against Wolverhampton Wanderers. And then later on at 7:30 p.m., Fulham will be up against Arsenal. In the Spanish La Liga, Sevilla will open the account against Real Mallorca at 3 p.m., while at 5 p.m., Barcelona will be at home against Girona. Barcelona do have some injury concerns to deal with, including Joan Garcia. Last I checked, Rafinha was one of those. Prior to the international break, Lamine Yamal had been one of those. Fermin Lopez, Dani Olmo, Ferran Torres, Gavi, they were all out through injury. Marc-Andre ter Stegen all out through injury. While on the side of Girona, Ivan Martin will be out due to suspension with a red card. Alejandro Frances will also be out with a suspension, while Joan Carlos is out with a knee injury. David Lopez suffered a hamstring injury, while Thomas Lemar, you remember, I think on loan from Atletico de Madrid, has a calf injury. Donny van de Beek, this one did sign eventually when he left Manchester United, has an Achilles tendon injury. Alejandro Frances also has an ankle injury despite his straight red card in their last outing. And then Azzedine Onahi also out with a leg injury. So, but on paper, Barcelona, like I said, they have their own injury issues to contend with, including Robert Lewandowski suffering that thigh injury. But you still fancy that with Wojciech Szczesny in goal, Jules Koundé, Eric Garcia, Pau Kubasi, and Alejandro Balde, that's a good backline enough. Frankie de Jong alongside Marc Casado, with Pedri ahead of them, Ronnie Badge, and Doro Fernandez, as well as Marcus Rashford, is a team that is still capable of winning a game against Girona, who've had a very, very poor start to their La Liga campaign. So that action should also be something that you look forward to in as far as the Spanish La Liga is concerned. Then later at 7:30 p.m., Villarreal will be up against Real Betis, while at 10 p.m., Atletico de Madrid will be up against Osasuna. You say Gyökeres will score a hat-trick. I think that will be the prayer for most Arsenal fans, for Victor Gyökeres to go on and score a hat-trick in today's fixture. Is there anything we've not discussed? For those of you that want the Manchester United versus Liverpool preview, please go down to the channel. Under the live section, you will find a headline that reads, what Manchester United need to do to beat Liverpool. You will find that there. What Man United need to do to beat Liverpool at Anfield. We did a preview of that. That was yesterday. Around the period. Anyways, so it's been a pleasure doing this with you. Thank you so much, Pedri. Thank you so much, LFC. Thank you so much, Shumail, and every single one of you that has been part of this broadcast for the last 1 hour and a quarter. Excuse me. Thank you for making Saturday worthwhile. Sorry. Thank you for making Saturday worthwhile. We will continue to engage on this forum, and we'll be back with the reviews from some of the games. Do enjoy the weekend. I know, Pedri, you said you're still hungover with the international break and the World Cup. That's what you want, but I hope you find solace in watching Barcelona playing today, even though they have so many injuries to deal with. Have yourselves a blessed weekend, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye for now.